The thunder didn't just roll across the Texas plains, it tore the sky open. Sophronia Vance felt it in her bones, a deep, angry vibration that matched the turmoil in her soul. She pressed her face to the rain-streaked window of the stagecoach, watching a world of mud and fury lurch by. Her dress, once a respectable navy blue, was a roadmap of her 3-day journey from San Antonio. Stained and wrinkled, the $12 silk was a ghost of a life she'd torched herself. That $12 had come from her grandmother's pearls, the last link to a world that had spit her out. The scandal. Even 2 weeks later, the word was a hot coal in her chest. Harold Whitman, the man who had promised her a life of Boston prestige, had given her public ruin instead. He hadn't just broken her heart, he'd shattered it with her own sister. Leaving wasn't a choice. It was the only move left on the board. "Silver Creek Ranch, miss." The driver's voice cut through the storm. "End of the line." Through the gray curtain of rain she saw it, a handful of buildings clinging to the earth like they were afraid the sky might snatch them away. This was her exile, her disappearance, a place to be a nobody, just a bookkeeper for a rancher she'd never met, a place to forget. The coach groaned to a halt. Sophronia didn't wait for the driver. She pushed the door open herself, and the Texas wind hit her like a fist. It ripped the pins from her hair, whipping dark strands across her face. Her skirts danced wildly as she grabbed her single leather satchel, her whole life packed into one bag, and stepped down, right into a lake of cold, thick mud. And that's when she heard it, a sound that sliced through the howl of the wind, the desperate, terrified cry of a calf. It was a sound of pure panic. Without a second thought, she followed it, her good boots sinking, the mud sucking at her heels. Behind the main house, pinned beneath a heavy, broken fence post, was a baby calf. Its hind leg was trapped, and it thrashed wildly, its eyes wide with terror. "Easy there, little one," she murmured, dropping to her knees in the mud. The ruined dress didn't even cross her mind. Her father was a veterinarian, and she'd spent her childhood as his shadow, learning the quiet language of frightened animals. As her hand reached for the trapped leg, a voice boomed through the rain, as rough and sharp as broken rock. "What in blazes do you think you're doing?" She looked up. A man was striding toward her, moving through the downpour like he was part of it. He was built like the land itself, broad-shouldered, hands that looked like they could bend iron, and a face carved from granite. His hat was pulled low, and the shadows made his eyes look like deep, dark pools. She felt a jolt, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long, long time. Fear. And something else. "This calf is trapped," she called back, her voice steady despite the thunder in her own chest. "If we don't free it, the leg will be ruined." He reached her in 3 long strides and crouched, his movements sure and economical. Up close he was younger than she'd thought, maybe 35. Lines radiated from his eyes, the kind a man gets from squinting into 1,000 sunrises. When he looked at her, really looked, she felt a crackle in the air between them, like lightning looking for a place to strike. "You're not dressed for this kind of work," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Neither are you for a tea party," she shot back, the words surprising her. "Are you going to help, or just critique my wardrobe?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was gone as quickly as it came. Without another word, he moved to the calf's head, gentling it with a low murmur, while she worked on the leg. Their hands brushed as they shifted the heavy fence post. A sudden warmth bloomed in her cheeks, and it had nothing to do with the cold rain. "There," she said, her voice soft, as the calf scrambled free. It favored the leg but was otherwise unharmed. "A little rest. He'll be fine." The cowboy straightened up slowly, his dark eyes never leaving her face. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat. He extended a calloused hand to help her up from the mud. "Burl Jameson," he said, his voice simple and direct. "Foreman here at Silver Creek. Sophronia Vance. She took his hand. His grip was warm and solid, a shock of life against her cold skin. She found herself not wanting to let go. Mr. Crawford is expecting me. Something flickered in his eyes, a shudder coming down. You're the bookkeeper. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Is there a problem with that? She asked, her spine stiffening. Just wondering what brings a city woman to a place like this. His gaze swept over her, taking in the muddy dress, the wild hair, the stubborn set of her jaw. Silver Creek ain't Boston. The familiar shame licked at her throat, but she swallowed it down. Perhaps I needed a change of scenery. Or perhaps you're running from something. The words hit their mark. She could feel the heat rising in her face. I don't see how that's any of your concern, Mr. Jameson. Everything that happens on this ranch is my concern, Miss Vance. His voice was quiet, but it held the weight of steel, especially when it might affect my men or my cattle. I assure you I'm not dangerous. She tried for a light tone, but it fell flat in the charged air. He stepped closer. So close she could smell the rain on his leather coat, the scent of damp earth and something else, something purely male that made her breath catch. Dangerous? He repeated, his voice a low growl. Lady, you walked into a hurricane, knelt in a mud pit to save a calf without a second thought, and stood toe-to-toe with me without backing down. I'd say dangerous is exactly what you are. Before she could process that, a shout came from the main house. An older man was hurrying toward them, surprisingly nimble for his age. Burl, you found our new bookkeeper? Found her in the mud, wrestling fence posts, Burl called back, but his eyes, dark and intense, stayed locked on hers. This had to be Josiah Crawford, the ranch owner. Miss Vance, welcome, he said, his face crinkled with a kind smile. This isn't quite the reception I'd planned. Sophronia tried to smooth her ruined skirts, suddenly aware of what a wreck she must look. Thank you, Mr. Crawford. I hope my informal introduction won't cast doubt on my abilities. Crawford chuckled, a warm, reassuring sound. Any woman who'll dive into a mud pit for one of my calves has her priorities straight. Come on, let's get you inside. As they turned toward the house, she felt Burl Jameson's eyes on her back. The look wasn't just appreciative, it was wary, like she was a puzzle he was afraid to solve, a storm that had just blown into his well-ordered world, and he was right to be worried. Her storm had followed her all the way to Texas. The ranch house was simple, but a fire roared in the stone hearth, chasing away the chill of the storm. Crawford showed her to a small, clean room with a narrow bed and a single window overlooking the endless, rolling plains. After he left, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair brought her a tray. Mrs. Henshaw, the housekeeper. The beef stew was the best thing Sophronia had ever tasted. Is Mr. Jameson always so prickly? She asked, unable to help herself. Mrs. Henshaw let out a dry chuckle. Burl takes his responsibilities to heart. He's been foreman since his daddy died 8 years back. Don't let the rough edges fool you. There isn't a better man in Texas. He seemed to think I was a threat. A mischievous glint sparked in the older woman's eyes. Well now, that's interesting. Burl doesn't usually pay visitors much mind at all. Maybe you made more of an impression than you realize. That night, as the storm finally exhausted itself, Sophronia lay in bed, her mind replaying the moment their hands had touched in the mud. Burl Jameson was nothing like the polished, deceitful men of Boston. He was raw, honest, and utterly unreadable. She had come here to run from her past, but as she drifted to sleep, she had the unnerving feeling that she might have just run directly into her future. The next morning, the world was washed clean. Sunlight streamed through her window, and the air smelled of wet earth and cedar. She found Crawford in his office, a cluttered room that smelled of old paper and strong coffee. Coffee? He offered, gesturing to a pot that looked like it could dissolve a spoon. Please. It was bitter and strong, and better than any tea she'd had in Boston. Crawford settled behind his massive oak desk, his weathered face suddenly serious. Now then, Miss Vance, let's talk about why I really brought you here. Her cup paused halfway to her lips. Don't get me wrong, he continued. We need a bookkeeper, something fierce. But that's not the whole story. We've been having problems. Problems I'm hoping your particular background might shed some light on. My background? Your father was a veterinarian. You know your way around animals. I saw it yesterday. Before he could explain, the office door swung open. Burl Jameson stood there, filling the frame. In the morning light, he looked even more formidable. He'd shaved, but nothing could soften the intensity in his eyes. Morning, Josiah, Miss Vance. His voice was carefully neutral, but his gaze lingered on her for a fraction of a second too long. Perfect timing, Burl, Crawford said. I was just telling Miss Vance about our situation. A silent conversation passed between the two men. Burl's jaw tightened. Is that wise? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Crawford leaned back. She's going to find out anyway once she starts on the books. Better she knows what she's looking for. Know what? Sophronia asked, her patience wearing thin. Crawford sighed, the sound of a man carrying a heavy burden. We've been losing cattle, Miss Vance. Not to rustlers, not to wolves, to sickness. Started 3 months ago. They just waste away. Have you had a veterinarian look at them? Examine the water? That's what we need your help with, Crawford said. We're hoping you might see something we've all missed. She glanced at Burl. He was standing by the door like a stone sentinel. And you think this is unwise, Mr. Jameson? I think bringing an outsider into ranch business is always a risk, he said, his voice clipped, especially one who might not understand the complexities of the situation. There it was again, that wall of secrecy. Perhaps you could elaborate on these complexities, she challenged, meeting his gaze. Perhaps, he countered, his eyes hard, you could focus on the bookkeeping you were hired for and leave the ranching to us. The dismissal stung. I see. And when the books show continued losses from dying cattle, I should just mark it down as a normal business expense? That's right. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. All right, you two, Crawford interrupted. Burl, I want you to take her out to the south pasture this afternoon. Show her what we're up against. Burl's expression made it clear he'd rather wrestle a grizzly, but he gave a curt nod. As you wish. After he left, Crawford gave her an apologetic look. Don't mind Burl, he's protective of this place. His father, Elwood, was foreman before him. Good man. But he trusted the wrong people. Cost him his life. A chill went down Sophronia's spine. How? That's Burl's story to tell, Crawford said, his eyes distant. Point is, he learned young that strangers can bring trouble. She spent the morning with the ledgers. The numbers painted a grim picture of a ranch bleeding out. But it was more than just falling profits. There were gaps, payments to suppliers with no invoices, trips to town with no stated purpose, entries that felt deliberately vague. It wasn't just bad bookkeeping, it felt like someone was actively trying to hide something. At noon, Mrs. Henshaw brought her a sandwich. Puzzled by some of these records, Sophronia admitted. The old woman's expression became carefully blank. Sometimes there are things that need doing that can't be put down in black and white, she said slowly, her gaze drifting out the window to the distant pastures. Things that would cause more harm than good if the wrong people knew. Before Sophronia could press her, she was gone. That afternoon, Burl was waiting with 2 saddled horses. He watched her mount, his hands hovering, ready to catch her if she stumbled. As they rode out, the sun warm on her back, she felt a strange sense of peace, even with the tension simmering between them. It's beautiful, she said, looking out at the rolling green hills. Beautiful and dying, he replied grimly. He pointed to a cluster of cattle near a winding creek. Even from a distance, she could see something was terribly wrong. Their heads hung low, their movements sluggish. Up close, it was worse. Their ribs showed through dull coats. One stood apart, its eyes glassy and unfocused. She dismounted and approached it slowly, her father's lessons coming back to her. She ran a hand along its flank. When did this start? 3 months ago. Started with one, then two. Now it's spreading like a fever. She moved to the creek, kneeling by the slow-moving water. It looked clear. She cupped some in her palm and sniffed. Nothing. Has anyone tested this water? Burl was quiet for a long moment. We've had it looked at. Something in his tone made her look up. By whom? Someone who knows about these things. The evasive answer was the final straw. Mr. Jameson, if you want my help, I need all the information. Who looked at this water, and what did they find? That's not your concern. She shot to her feet. Not my concern. These animals are suffering, and you're withholding information that could save them. I'm protecting information that could get people hurt, he shot back, his voice rising. And you think I'm the one who will hurt them? He stepped toward her, closing the space between them, until she had to crane her neck to look up at him. I think you're a stranger who showed up at exactly the wrong time, asking all the right questions. And in my experience, that's no coincidence. The accusation was a slap in the face. You think I'm part of this? I think you're here for reasons you haven't shared, he ground out. And until I know what they are, I'm not trusting you with a damn thing. They stood there, the sick cattle forgotten, the air crackling with anger and a raw, undeniable attraction. Fine, she said, her voice shaking with repressed fury. Keep your secrets, but don't expect me to work miracles with half the truth. She turned to her horse, but his voice stopped her, sharp and urgent. Sophronia. The sound of her first name in his rough voice sent a jolt through her. She looked back. His expression had softened, a flicker of regret in his dark eyes. There are things you don't understand, he said, his voice lower now. Things that could put you in danger, real danger. What kind of danger? He looked like he was about to tell her. His jaw worked, the words right there on his tongue. Then the mask slammed down again. The kind you're better off not knowing about. The ride back was silent and tense, but that night, as she worked late in the office, she couldn't shake him from her mind. A lamp burned in his bunkhouse window, a single point of light in the vast darkness. What secrets was he protecting? And why did she care so much? Then she saw it, a figure moving stealthily from the bunkhouse toward the barn. It was Burl. Without knowing why, she slipped out the back door, her heart pounding. She crept across the yard, the moonlight her only cover, and pressed her ear to the rough wood of the barn. She could hear his voice inside, low and urgent. Getting worse every day. If we don't do something soon. Then another voice, younger, unfamiliar. The tests confirm it, Burl. It's poison. Someone's been dumping a chemical compound upstream. Deliberate. Poison. Her blood ran cold. Any idea who? Burl asked. Could be anyone, but they know what they're doing. This isn't random. Have you told Crawford? Not yet. Wanted to talk to you first. A pause. We keep this quiet for now. If word gets out before we know who's behind it, it could put the whole ranch in more danger. Footsteps moved toward the door. Sophronia flattened herself against the wall, her breath held tight in her chest. She waited until the visitor's horse was a distant sound before she crept back to the house, her mind reeling. So he knew. He knew the cattle were being murdered. He was investigating it in secret. But why? Why wouldn't he trust her? Why wouldn't he trust Crawford? As she slipped back into the office, one thing was terrifyingly clear. The sickness wasn't the real problem at Silver Creek Ranch. It was just a symptom of something far more sinister. and Burl Jameson was standing right in the middle of it. The next morning, the bad news hit like a physical blow. 3 more dead cattle. Crawford stood in the yard, his face ashen, looking 20 years older. "That's 18 head lost," he said, his voice heavy. "We'll be bankrupt by Christmas." Sophronia stepped forward, unable to stay silent any longer. "Mr. Crawford, I must insist. Let me examine the water sources properly." "No," Burl's voice was a whip crack. "It's not necessary." After what she'd overheard, the dismissal was infuriating. "I believe I might be able to help." "You believe wrong." He turned to face her, his eyes like chips of flint. "Your job is keeping books, Miss Vance, not playing veterinarian." "I'm trying to save your cattle." "My cattle don't need saving by some city woman who thinks she can solve everything with book learning." The words hit their mark, cruel and precise. She could feel Crawford shifting uncomfortably beside them, but he said nothing. "I see," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "Then perhaps you can explain why your precious cattle keep dying while you refuse the only help you've got." A dangerous light flashed in his eyes. "Maybe some help isn't worth the risk." "What risk?" she demanded. "What possible risk could there be in letting me examine?" She stopped, the pieces clicking into place with a horrifying certainty. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Unless you already know what's killing them." The silence was absolute. Burl's jaw clenched. Crawford suddenly seemed fascinated by a cloud on the horizon. "You do know," she accused, her voice rising. "You know exactly what's happening, and you're letting them die rather than trust me with the truth." "Sophronia," Crawford started. "Don't," she snapped, turning her fury on Burl. "All this time you've been treating me like a criminal, but the real threat here is your stubborn, stupid pride." "You don't understand," he began. "Then make me understand." The words exploded out of her. "Stop treating me like I'm made of glass and tell me what the hell is going on." For a single breathtaking moment, she thought he would. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the mask cracking. Then it hardened, more resolute than ever. "Some things are better left alone, Miss Vance. I suggest you remember that." He turned and walked away, leaving her shaking with a fury so profound it felt like grief. If he wouldn't tell her the truth, she would find it herself. That afternoon, she rode out alone, following the creek upstream, past the grazing lands into the rocky, wilder country beyond. She needed to do something. Anything. 2 miles from the ranch house, a glint of metal caught her eye, half hidden in the rocks near the bank. It was a rusted metal container. Traces of a chemical residue clung to the edges. Her father's training kicked in. The color, the texture, it was an industrial-grade toxin, more than enough to poison a herd of cattle. She was so focused, she didn't hear him approach. A shadow fell over her. Find something interesting? Burl. He was standing over her, his expression unreadable. Relief washed over her. Here was the proof. He couldn't deny it now. "Yes," she said, getting to her feet. "This container. It's exactly what I'd expect to find if someone were deliberately poisoning the water." She waited for the vindication, the apology. Instead, his face was filled with a weary resignation. "I know," he said quietly. The words knocked the air from her lungs. "You know?" "I've known for weeks. That container has been there since this whole thing started." She stared at him, the world tilting. "You've known someone was killing your cattle and you said nothing? You watched me. You let me. It's complicated." "Complicated?" she shrieked, the sound echoing in the empty hills. "Your ranch is dying. How is that complicated?" "Because the person doing the poisoning isn't the real problem," he roared back, his own control finally snapping. "They're just a weapon, and until I know who's holding that weapon, saying anything just puts more people in the crosshairs." "So you lie to everyone? You lie to me?" Her voice broke. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was the deep, sharp pain of betrayal. "I never lied to you." You let me think I was incompetent. You made me doubt my own mind rather than just trust me with the truth. I was protecting you. The words exploded out of him. Protecting you from getting killed if the wrong people think you know too much. What people? Who are you so afraid of? The gaps in the ledgers, the secret meetings, the poison. It was all swirling in her mind, forming a terrible picture. There's something else, she said slowly. Something you're still not telling me. This isn't just about poisoned water, is it? His silence was the only answer she needed. What is it, Burl? She pressed, her voice barely a whisper. What's really going on here? He looked away, toward the distant hills, his jaw working as if he were wrestling with the secret. When he finally spoke, the words seemed dragged from the depths of his soul. Gold. The world stopped. Gold, he repeated, his voice heavy with a burden she was only just beginning to understand. A vein of it running through these hills. Rich enough to start a war. Someone knows it's here. They've been trying to force Crawford to sell for months. The poisoning, it's just their latest move. Make the ranch worthless so he has no choice but to sell it for pennies on the dollar. The full, staggering weight of his deception crashed down on her. How long have you known? Since I was a boy, my father found it. And you never told Crawford? My father made me swear I wouldn't, he said, his voice thick with old pain. He said it would only bring vultures and death. He was right. When word got out anyway, it got him killed. Her anger faltered, but she held on. So you decided to handle it all yourself. Keep everyone in the dark. Someone had to. Someone had to trust the people who care about this place, she cried, tears finally streaming down her face. Someone had to believe that other people might be willing to fight with you if they knew what was at stake. At least then you would have been honest. They stood there, the afternoon sun beating down, the air thick with unspoken feelings and broken trust. I thought, she said, her voice small and broken. I thought there might be something real between us. His stoic mask finally cracked, revealing the raw pain beneath. There is. No, she said, turning away from him. There's nothing between us but secrets, and I'm done with secrets. She started walking back toward the ranch, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. Sophronia, please, his voice called after her. You don't understand the danger. She whirled around, fury blazing in her eyes. The only danger I'm in, Mr. Jameson, is from caring about a man who values his secrets more than anything else. This time, when she walked away, he didn't try to stop her, and all she could see was the look on his face, the look of a man who had just lost everything and knew it was his own damn fault. The next morning, the silence at Silver Creek was heavier than any storm. Sophronia found Mrs. Henshaw in the kitchen, kneading bread dough with a ferocity that seemed out of place in the quiet dawn. Couldn't sleep, Sophronia said, pouring coffee with a trembling hand. She had to know. Mrs. Henshaw, what do you know about gold on this ranch? The housekeeper's hands went still. She sighed, a deep, weary sound, and wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron. Sit down, child. It's time you knew the whole story. The story she told was one of greed and murder. Elwood Jameson had discovered the gold, a secret he and his young son kept for years. But secrets in a place like this have a way of seeping out. Men came, dangerous men. They didn't want to buy the land, they wanted to take it. They beat Elwood something terrible, trying to make him tell them where the vein was, Mrs. Henshaw said, her voice thick with grief. When he wouldn't break, they set fire to his cabin, with him still inside, made it look like an accident. Dear God, Sophronia whispered. Burl was 18. He saw it all. He learned a hard lesson that day. That gold was a curse, and silence was the only way to keep the people he cared about safe. A new detail suddenly emerged, one that made Sophronia's blood run cold. Elwood trusted Josiah Crawford more than any man alive, told him everything. It broke Josiah's heart what happened. Before she could process this new, confusing piece of information, the kitchen door flew open. It was Crawford, his face pale with panic. "They've got Burl." The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the stone floor. "What?" "Found his horse wandering loose on the north boundary," Crawford rasped. "Blood on the saddle. Tracks show at least 3 riders. They're heading for the old mining camp in the hills." "Who?" she began, but Mrs. Henshaw was already moving toward a locked gun cabinet. "The Rena brothers," the housekeeper said, her voice flat and cold as steel. "Clovis and Ransom. Vultures. Been trying to strong-arm folks out of their land all along the creek." The pieces slammed together in Sophronia's mind. "They're the ones poisoning the water. They want to force you to sell to get the gold. And now they have Burl." Crawford's hands shook as he loaded a rifle. "They'll kill him once he tells them where the vein is." "Then we have to stop them," Sophronia said, a strange, cold calm settling over her. "Miss Vance, you stay here," Crawford ordered. "These are killers. And you're going to ride up there alone against 3 of them?" She stood, her chin set. "I know those hills now. And I know how to patch up a wound. You need me." Mrs. Henshaw pressed a small, heavy pistol into her hand. "Sometimes, dear, the only way to save what you love is to fight for it." The ride into the hills was a blur of adrenaline and fear. As they climbed higher, she thought not of the danger, but of the man they were racing to save. He had lied to her, yes, but she finally understood why. He wasn't protecting a secret. He was protecting them, carrying the weight of his father's murder alone for all these years. Crawford pointed to a cluster of dilapidated shacks tucked into a canyon. "That's it. That's where they'll have him." They could hear voices, rough laughter, followed by the sickening thud of a fist hitting flesh. Her heart seized, but she forced herself to breathe. They crept into position, hiding in the rocks on opposite sides of the main cabin. Through a grimy window, she could see him. Burl was tied to a chair, his face bruised and bloody, but his eyes were blazing with pure, uncut defiance. A tall, well-dressed man with cold eyes circled him like a shark. This had to be Clovis Rena. "We know your daddy found it, boy," Clovis said, his voice a silky menace. "Now, are you going to tell us where it is, or do we have to get unpleasant?" Another blow. Sophronia's vision went red. She looked across the clearing and met Crawford's eyes. He gave her a single sharp nod. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out from behind the rocks into the open. "That's enough," she called out, her voice ringing in the still mountain air. Everything stopped. Clovis Rena appeared in the doorway, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Well, the little bookkeeper, come to rescue her cowboy. "I've come to make you an offer," she said, her hands trembling as she clutched the pistol Mrs. Henshaw had given her. "Information on the gold's location, in exchange for Mr. Jameson." Clovis's eyebrows shot up. "And what makes you think you have that information?" "Because I'm the one who found the survey maps your men missed in the ranch office," she bluffed, praying it was convincing. It was. She could hear excited whispers from inside the cabin. "Bring her in," Clovis ordered. The moment she stepped inside, she knew she'd made a mistake. His brother, Ransom, was a mountain of a man, and there was a third man, wiry and nervous, his hand hovering over his gun. "Now, about those maps," Clovis said. "Let him go first." "I don't think so." Clovis's smile was chilling. "You see, Miss Vance, we've been watching you. We know you ran from a scandal in Boston. We know you've been asking too many questions." He took a step closer, his eyes boring into hers. "What I can't figure out is if you're just nosy, or if someone sent you." His gaze flickered to Burl, and he let out a low, insinuating chuckle. "Spending a lot of time alone with the foreman, aren't you?" A cold dread trickled down her spine. These men weren't just after gold. They knew things they shouldn't know. her past, her reasons for being here. This was bigger than a land grab. This was personal. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Crawford's shadow move past the window. It was time. "You want to know about the gold?" she said, her voice loud and clear. "I'll tell you, but first, you should know something about the poison you've been using." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small glass vial filled with clear water. "This is a concentrated solution of it, highly unstable, especially near an open flame." It was a complete lie, but she delivered it with the conviction of a madwoman. "You're bluffing," Clovis sneered, but a flicker of doubt entered his eyes. "Am I?" She held the vial up to the light of the oil lamp, letting it catch the flame. "Care to find out?" That's when Crawford kicked the back door off its hinges, his rifle roaring. Chaos erupted. Ransom went for his gun, and Crawford's shot spun him around, wounded. The wiry man dove for cover. Clovis lunged for her, intending to use her as a shield, but she was ready. She threw the vial against the far wall. It shattered with a harmless splash of water, but in the confusion, it was enough. Burl threw his entire weight backward, snapping the ropes that held him. He was on his feet in an instant, a bloody, furious whirlwind of motion. The fight was short and brutal. Crawford pinned the third man down, while Burl and Clovis crashed over a table. Sophronia found herself facing the wounded Ransom, who was struggling to raise his pistol. She didn't think. She just raised the gun Mrs. Henshaw had given her and fired. The shot went wide, but it was enough. Enough! Burl's voice cracked like a whip. He had Clovis's own gun pressed to the man's temple. The fight was over. Minutes later, the Reyna brothers and their man were tied up. Crawford had ridden for the sheriff. She was alone with Burl in the flickering lamplight. "Are you hurt?" she whispered, reaching up to touch his bruised face. "I'm fine." His voice was rough with emotion. He caught her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Sophronia, what you did, coming after me like that, was incredibly stupid," she finished for him. "Was incredibly brave," he corrected her, his dark eyes searching hers. "You saved my life." The space between them hummed with unspoken words, with the violent, terrifying, and beautiful thing that had grown between them. But as they stood there, a new, chilling thought took root in her mind. The Reynas knew about Boston. They knew about her scandal. How? Who were they really working for? The danger wasn't over. It had just begun. 3 days later, an uneasy peace settled over Silver Creek. The Reyna brothers were in jail, but the shadow of what they represented still lingered. Sophronia buried herself in the ranch's books, and with the new knowledge of the conspiracy, the numbers began to make a different kind of sense. It wasn't just sabotage. It was a systematic, surgical campaign to destroy the ranch from the outside in. Feed suppliers hiking prices, buyers pulling out of deals, all orchestrated. A knock on the office door made her jump. It was Burl, hat in his hands. The bruises on his face were fading, but the look in his eyes was still raw. "Crawford says you've made sense of the books," he said quietly. "Finally, the Renas were more thorough than we knew." He nodded, his gaze distant. "There's something else, about the gold." Her hands went still. "What about it?" "I want to show you." She looked up at him, surprised. "Why?" "Because you deserve the whole truth," he said, his voice low and steady. "Because I've been carrying my father's secrets for so long, I forgot some secrets are meant to be shared, with people you trust." "And you trust me?" The question hung between them. "Yes," he said simply. "I do." They rode high into the hills, to a place the rocky land itself seemed to be hiding. Behind a curtain of overgrown brush was the entrance to a small, dark cave. Burl lit a lantern, and the golden light revealed a sight that stole her breath. It wasn't a mine. It was a miracle. A thick, shimmering vein of pure gold ran along the rock wall, embedded in quartz that glittered like a captured galaxy. It was a king's ransom, a fortune beyond imagining. "My God," she whispered. "Now you see why my father was so afraid," Burl said. "This much gold, it makes men into monsters." "What will you do with it?" "I don't know," he admitted. "For years I told myself I was protecting it, but maybe I was just hiding from it." He turned to face her in the warm golden light. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough, "for not giving up on me. Thank you for finally trusting me. Sophronia," he began, taking a step closer, "I need you to know, the way I acted, it wasn't about you. It was about me. I was trying to control everything because I was scared. Scared of losing anyone else the way I lost my father." He took another step, so close now she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "And I was scared of you." Her breath caught. "Scared of me?" "Of how much I wanted you," he confessed, the words raw and honest. "From the moment I saw you kneeling in that mud. I wanted you when you stood up to me, when you rode into these hills, when you walked into that cabin to save my life. Sophronia, I'm not a man for fancy words. I'm just a cowboy who spent most of his life alone because it felt safer." "But—" he stopped, struggling for the right words. "But what?" she whispered. "But I'm in love with you," he said, the confession hanging in the silent cave. "Have been since that first night. Probably will be until the day I die." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. "In Boston," she began, her voice shaky, "I was always trying to be someone else. Someone proper, someone suitable. But here, with you, for the first time in my life, I feel like myself." He reached up and cupped her face in his calloused hands, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I love you too," she whispered, her voice finally finding its strength. "I think I have since you helped me save that calf." Their kiss was a promise, a beginning, a future forged in fire and sealed in gold. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the heart of the mountain, while outside, the Texas sun set the sky ablaze. But the peace was a fragile thing, and a week later, it shattered. Crawford burst into the kitchen, his face a mask of terror. "They broke out," he gasped. "The Rena brothers overpowered a deputy on the way to Austin." Mrs. Henshaw's hands froze on the dough she was kneading. "Sheriff thinks they're headed this way," Crawford continued. "For revenge, and for the gold." Ice filled Sophronia's veins. "Where's Burl?" "Out on the north pasture. I sent one of the hands to find him." Just then, the sound of a horse galloping into the yard sent them all to the window. It was the ranch hand, his horse lathered, his face white with fear. "It's Burl," he choked out. "He's gone. Signs of a struggle. They got him again." He held out a crumpled piece of paper. "They left this." Crawford took the note, his hand trembling. It was a trap, a summons. They were to meet at the mine, and they were to bring the woman who knows about the maps, or Burl dies. "They have him because of me," Sophronia said, her voice a deadly calm. "Because of the lies I told. This is my fault, and I'm going to fix it." An hour later, she rode alone toward the mine, a satchel that looked identical to her first one slung over her shoulder. But this time, the contents were very different. This time, she wasn't just bluffing. The mine entrance was guarded. Clovis Rena stepped out of the shadows, his face unshaven, his eyes burning with a feverish greed. "Miss Vance, so good of you to come." He led her inside. Burl was there, tied to a support beam, his face a mess of fresh bruises. His eyes, when they met hers, were filled with fury and despair. "You shouldn't have come," he growled. "Where else would I be?" she replied softly. "Let's dispense with the games," Clovis sneered. "That chemical you threw last time. It was water, wasn't it? We tested it. A clever trick." but you won't fool us twice. A new figure stepped out of the deeper shadows of the mine, a man in a tailored suit that was hopelessly out of place in the dusty cave. He was smiling, a cold, familiar smile that made her blood turn to ice. "It has been a while, Sophronia," he said. It was Harold Whitman, her ex-fiancé. "Harold?" she breathed, the world spinning around her. "What are you doing here?" "Business," he said smoothly. "This little ranch sits on top of something far more valuable than gold. A mineral deposit my associates in Boston are very keen to acquire. The cattle poisoning was just a way to expedite the sale. But you, my dear, complicated things." "My sister," she whispered. "Ah, yes. Your sister wasn't my lover. She was trying to warn you. She'd uncovered my business dealings. I had to discredit you both, drive you out of Boston before you could expose me. Sending you here to this forgotten corner of Texas seemed like the perfect solution. Imagine my surprise when you started uncovering my plans all over again. The betrayal was so immense, so complete, it left her breathless. It was never about a simple affair. It was about this. All of it. Her ruin, her exile. It had all been a lie, a calculated move in his twisted game. "Now," Harold said, his voice hardening, "you're going to tell us where the main entrance to this mine is. Burl's father sealed it up years ago. We know there's another way in." She looked at Burl, at the defiant blaze in his eyes. Then she looked at the monster who had destroyed her life. And she smiled. "No," she said. She reached into her satchel and pulled out another vial. This one was filled with a dark, oily liquid Mrs. Henshaw had helped her concoct from lamp oil and turpentine. "You're right," she said to Clovis. "Last time it was water." She held up the vial. "This time it's not." She looked Harold dead in the eye. "You wanted this mine? You can have it." Just then, a rifle shot echoed from the mine entrance. Crawford. In the instant of distraction, she didn't throw the vial at the wall. She hurled it straight at the oil lamp hanging from a beam. Glass shattered, oil sprayed, and the world erupted in a roar of fire. The mine became a hell of smoke and screaming. Sophronia launched herself at Burl, a knife flashing in her hand, sawing at his ropes. "The whole place is going to go up!" someone shrieked. The ropes parted. Burl grabbed her hand, pulling her away from the chaos, deeper into the mine. "This way!" he yelled over the roar. "There's an old ventilation shaft!" They scrambled through a narrow passage, the sound of gunshots and the roar of the fire pursuing them. The heat was unbearable, the smoke choking them. They burst out into the cool night air, coughing, covered in soot, just as a deep groaning sound echoed from the mountain. The main entrance of the mine collapsed, sealing the fire, the gold, and the ghosts of the past inside forever. Later, as the sheriff's deputies led a captured and burned Harold Whitman and the remaining Rena brother away, she sat on a boulder, watching the smoke curl into the starry sky. "You realize," Burl said, sitting beside her, "you just destroyed one of the richest gold veins in Texas." She looked at the smoking ruin of the mountain. "Good," she said. "It was cursed." He was quiet for a long moment. "My father would have agreed with you." He looked at her, his face illuminated by the distant fire. "What will you do now?" The question hung between them, full of unspoken hope. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from a prestigious veterinary school in Houston. A full professorship, her own research lab. It was the dream she'd chased her entire life, the validation she'd craved. "It's everything you've worked for, Sophronia," Burl said, his voice carefully neutral, already putting a wall between them to protect himself from the hurt. She looked at him, at the ranch they had fought for, at the life that was finally, truly hers. That night, she wrote 2 letters. One, a polite refusal to the Institute in Houston. The other, an acceptance of a future she never knew she wanted. She found Burl in the barn, mending tack by lamplight. "I turned it down," she said simply. His hands stilled. "Sophronia, you can't." I can, she said, moving closer. My dream isn't in a city, in a laboratory. It's here, building something that matters, with you. Hope, brilliant and fierce, lit up his eyes. He stood slowly. Are you asking me to marry you, Miss Vance? I'm asking you to be my partner, she said, stepping into his arms, in everything. 6 months later, a new, freshly painted sign hung over the entrance to a small clinic on the edge of the Silver Creek Ranch. It read, Jameson and Vance, Large Animal Medicine. Sophronia had stopped running from her past. She had turned and faced it down with fire and fury. And in the heart of Texas, she had finally found what she'd been running toward all along. A home. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption in the Old West, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales from the edge of the map.